It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I was at a project management business analysis conference here in Orlando not too long ago, and I had someone come up to me and start discussing the concept of a data driven retrospective. And I wanted to learn more because I didn't want to just write it off the second I heard it. I said, so tell me more about this data driven retrospective. What is it and how does it work? And the answer I got was quite interesting. They started off the conversation with a team that was a little bit dysfunctional. They started feeling like they weren't getting value out of their retrospectives, or they started complaining about having a retrospective at the end of every single sprint and that they needed to do something to provide value from the retrospective, and that leadership wasn't getting anything out of it. Now, retrospective is one of the most important meetings that you can have because it's the one that focuses on continuous improvement and continuous help for the team. So, in speaking with this individual, they started talking about bringing metrics into the picture to show evidence to the team so that they can compare themselves with past cycles and discuss their performance related metrics. Now, this scared me. I'll tell you right now, this was bad. So, when you start talking about using things like velocity, well, we usually ship 40 points per sprint, but this time we only shipped 26. What happened? Right? Why did this occur? Were there too many bugs to fix, which didn't have story point values? Or, I mean, I could write down a list of some of the things that I've heard. And how has this affected our sprint goal? Did we plan for these things in advance? And we could sit here and create every formula, algorithm, and anything on the planet. And what I can tell you is, in the end, none of those things matter because all you're doing is focusing on output at that point. Especially if you're collecting metrics. So this individual told me about Jira, and they said that they were using a Jira. I want to say he called it a control chart. And he said that you could do a ticket ID to collect metrics to see that the ticket spent 2 days, 6 hours, and 12 minutes in development, and 1 week, 2 days, 13 hours, 38 minutes, and 12 seconds in review. That it was in testing for 3 days, 9 hours. And I'm like, well, what does that tell me? Does that give me valuable information that I can use in a retrospective? It seemed like to me that this was an attempt to use metrics, to weaponize metrics, to dictate that teams should be more or less alike, more or less stable. And what I can tell you is that's not good practice. Anytime you're weaponizing things like story points or the amount of time it took to do something and trying to compare one individual to another or teams to teams, even worse, that it's just going to create this environment, this unhealthy environment within the teams. It's going to create an environment where psychological safety does not exist. And it doesn't matter how you lay this out, whether you try to make it fun or whether you try to do, certain gamification of trying to figure out what you're trying to do. I think that just the whole concept, when it was brought up to me, made my skin crawl and my spidey senses go off. And I think now I know why. The key for me is that a retrospective doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to say it again. A retrospective doesn't have to be perfect. The more energy that I feel in a retrospective when it comes around conversations, the better. And sometimes people freak out when they hear me say that because they're like, are you encouraging people to be bullies? And of course, my answer is no. I don't want anyone to bully anyone else. But at the same time, I feel like high-performing teams are usually the ones who have one foot on a banana peel and the other foot on high performing. And those are the ones who are calling things out saying, hey, this happened, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be quote unquote data driven if the team is focused on continuous improvement. If the team can come back around and say, we did this and this happened and this is good, then great. The facts are there and we're good to go. And if you consider that data driven, I'm fine with that. But I just don't want us to turn to data all the time to drive value in the retrospective. I think that if the team is truly focused on impact, what impact did this have on our end consumers? And how did it make us feel when we got it out there? And how did the consumer react? And what type of engagement did we have from it? Those are valuable, incredible metrics. Anything beyond that, I think if you're using that data to drive any meeting, whether it's an estimation meeting, a forecasting meeting, a retrospective, I think it's out of line. And I hope that we can get in the practice of focusing on the right things. So, one of the things that I do with my teams, and I have a whole series of episodes about this, is when it comes to retrospectives, I either have a really simple retrospective, which I call the quad, or I have a retrospective where I ask the right questions, but I have a bank of 15 questions that I can pull from. And those questions might be, what were events that happened in our timeline during our sprint? And how did that impact our ability to deliver in the course of this sprint? Notice that I'm talking about events and work and not individuals and not even teams at this point. How did this impact our customer at the end? I'm talking about impact, focus, driven on things that go beyond output, things that are more difficult to measure, but things that we can know with confidence are driving results. And I truly do believe if we can get to that point where we're deviating away from everything being data driven and starting to really get into the EQ, the emotional of the team, that it's going to help us yield much better results. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, if you have something you want us to discuss, reach out, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.